If you were to step onto an ancient battlefield, I mean, the absolute last thing you'd want to be is the biggest, heaviest guy in the valley.
Right, yeah.
But for centuries, that's exactly how we've kind of misread history's most famous underdog story. We just assume that overcoming impossible odds is, simply about brute strength.
Like sweating it out in a training montage.
Exactly, just forcing your way through an obstacle. But when you look at the actual history, the geography, and, well, the tactical strategy of those encounters, that entire brute force narrative just totally collapses.
It really does. We project all our modern anxieties onto these historical events. We tend to romanticize the idea of muscling past the giant in our way, assuming that sheer willpower is the ultimate deciding factor.
But the landscape of success is actually built on something entirely counterintuitive. So today's mission for this deep dive is to explore the anatomy of overcoming impossible odds.
It's a fascinating subject.
It really is. We are looking at how having the right structural framework, whether that's an ancient battlefield or something modern, actually flips the script on intimidating giants. And to do that, we have gathered a seriously eclectic stack of sources for you today.
Oh, definitely eclectic.
We're pulling from ancient geographical analyses, deep theological commentaries, several modern sermons on the historical account of David and Goliath, and surprisingly, a viral Reddit post.
Yeah, the Reddit post is wild.
Right. It's a post outlining the structural psychology of writing a podcast script.
It sounds like a chaotic mix on the surface, merging ancient combat with modern audio production.
A little bit. Okay.
But the underlying principle connecting them is really profound. Whether you are staring down a heavily armored warlord or just the terrifying blank page of a new creative project, success rarely comes from swinging wildly.
Definitely not.
It requires understanding the landscape and engaging in meticulous, almost invisible preparation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we even look at the clash itself, we have to understand why these two armies were standing in that specific dirt. I mean, the Philistines weren't just picking a random fight in an empty field, right?
Far from it. Our geographical sources provide a really great visualization of this terrain. Historically, the land of Israel was shaped a bit like a loaf of French bread.
A loaf of French bread.
Yeah, you have the flat coastal plain to the west, which is where the Philistines live, and then to the east you have the elevated, rugged hill country where the Israelites live.
And separating them is the Shephelah, right? That buffer zone of low rolling hills and broad valleys.
Exactly, and the Elah Valley, where this standoff actually occurs, is one of those crucial west-east corridors. The Philistines were moving through this specific valley with a highly calculated strategic goal.
It wasn't just a raid.
No. At the eastern end of the Elah Valley, nestled up in the hill country, sits Bethlehem. If the Philistines could take Bethlehem, they would establish a stronghold right on the main north-south artery of Judah.
Which would effectively cut the kingdom in half.
Exactly.
So the geopolitical stakes were astronomical here. But the army of Israel isn't paralyzed by the geography. I mean, they are paralyzed by the physical scale of the threat standing in the valley. Our sources break down Goliath's actual size, and it completely redefines the term giant.
It really does. The historical texts place his height anywhere from 9'6" to 9'9".
Which is just terrifying.
And we have to banish the image of a tall, lanky individual. This height aligns with the historical records of the Anakites, which were a lineage of unusually large warriors who had actually settled in Goliath's hometown of Gath.
So he was a human fortress.
Basically, yeah. The ancient texts detail that he wore a coat of bronze scale armor weighing 5,000 shekels.
Which means what, exactly?
That translates to roughly 125 pounds of solid bronze just resting on his shoulders.
Wow. Which means the man himself had to be massive just to move.
Right. Historians estimate that for a warrior to carry that kind of encumbrance into combat while maintaining balance and lethality, Goliath likely weighed well over 400 pounds.
That is insane.
And he carried a spear with an iron head that weighed 15 pounds on its own.
Just the head of the spear.
Just the head.
Man. And for 40 days, morning and evening, so 80 separate times, this walking tank steps out and taunts the Israelite army.
Yeah.
And the entire camp, including King Saul, just freezes.
Complete paralysis.
Yeah. And one of the sermons we looked at actually uses the movie Batman, begins to capture this psychological state. It asks, what happens when good people do nothing?
Right. Gotham City loses hope.
Exactly. Gotham slowly falls to fear. And the Israelite army experienced that exact same systemic collapse of nerve.
What's fascinating here is the true nature of ancient warfare. A battle of champions wasn't just a brutal way to minimize casualties, it was profoundly theological.
House.
Well, when Goliath stood in the valley shouting, "Am I not a Philistine?" he was establishing a spiritual hierarchy. He was basically asking, don't you believe my God, Dagon, is superior to your God?
Ah, I see.
Yeah, every morning he walked out, he was reinforcing the narrative that the living God of Israel was powerless against physical might.
So Goliath was essentially manipulating their psychology before his sword was even swung. And it's funny, we actually see that exact same make-or-break psychological window detailed in the Reddit guide for audio creators.
Oh, the episode intro stuff?
Yeah. The poster breaks down the episode intro of a script, explaining that the first few minutes totally dictate listener retention. It's this critical window where cognitive load is established, authority is set, and the listener decides to either commit entirely or just leave.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. So Goliath's introduction was structurally engineered to make the Israelites mentally quit the battle before they ever stepped onto the field.
He was setting the terms of engagement right there in his intro. By dominating the psychological landscape, he was forcing Israel to assume they had to play by his rules, on his terms, in the realm of heavy infantry combat.
So if agility and distance are the ultimate advantages against a heavily armored giant, it makes King Saul's reaction even more baffling. Because when David finally arrives at the camp and volunteers to fight, Saul's immediate instinct is to strap this young kid into his own royal armor.
Yeah, Saul is operating completely under the paralyzing framework Goliath established. He assumes the only way to fight a heavy infantryman is to build a slightly smaller heavy infantryman.
Which is just a terrible idea.
Right. He offers David this rich, thick, heavy armor. But David attempts to walk in it and immediately recognizes the flaw. He tells the king, I can't go in these because I haven't tested them.
Here's where it gets really interesting, especially when we view this through the lens of our modern creative source. Saul, forcing his heavy, clunky armor onto David, is basically the ancient equivalent of taking bad structural advice.
Like using someone else's template.
It's exactly. The Reddit post warns creators against relying on lazy crutches, like starting an interview by asking a guest to tell the audience about yourself. It feels like the official way to do things because everyone else does it, but it's a structural trap.
It just forces you into a rambling, unnatural rhythm.
Right. Taking on someone else's unverified structure pretty much guarantees failure.
And to understand why David's specific rejection of that armor was so devastating to Goliath, we have to look at the tactical ecosystem of the ancient world.
The rock, paper, scissors dynamic.
Yes, the historical sources note that ancient armies operated with this dynamic between cavalry, infantry, and artillery. We consistently view this story as a vastly outmatched infantryman going up against a giant infantryman.
But David wasn't infantry at all.
Precisely. David was highly trained artillery.
Oh, wow.
And historically, artillery is the direct counter to slow, heavy infantry. A skilled slinger wasn't just a kid throwing rocks. The sources reference the Book of Judges, which actually documents 700 Benjamite slingers who could sling a stone at a hair and not miss.
I mean, one of the historians in our SAC actually compared David's tactic to bringing a howitzer to a sword fight.
It is a stunningly accurate analogy when you look at the physics involved. A sling operates on rotational velocity. A leather pouch is spun to build tremendous centrifugal force.
So it's basically a gun.
Pretty much. When one cord is released, the stone acts as a projectile with stopping power comparable to a modern handgun. Goliath's 125 pounds of bronze were designed to deflect swords and spears in close quarters combat.
But not a bullet.
Right. David bypassed the bronze entirely by using a humble, tested instrument to strike with lethal kinetic energy from a distance. He completely changed the paradigm.
He really did. He knew his strengths. He understood his own structural framework. So he walks down to the brook, bypasses the swords, and selects 5 smooth stones.
5 stones, yeah.
Which brings up a tension point I've always struggled with when reading this account. The traditional narrative says David had absolute faith that God would deliver the giant into his hands. But if his faith is so unwavering, why grab 5 stones? Doesn't preparing backup ammunition imply a lack of faith?
It's a very common modern assumption that preparation and divine inspiration are somehow mutually exclusive. But the theological commentaries forcefully reject that dichotomy.
They do.
Yeah, picking up 5 stones was not a symptom of doubt. God never promised David that he would win the battle on the very first throw.
Okay, but doesn't over-preparing like that kill the authenticity of the moment? I mean, whether you are stepping onto a battlefield or sitting down to host an in-depth interview, if you script out every possible contingency, don't you lose that natural, spontaneous magic?
Not necessarily.
If you truly trusted the outcome, why not step out with empty pockets and trust that the exact right stone would be provided the moment he needed it?
Because true faith does not demand magical intervention to replace practical readiness. And there is actually a deeply pragmatic historical reason for those 5 stones. Yeah, several of our sources point to the broader context found later in the historical texts, which reveals that Goliath had 4 giant relatives living in Gath.
Wait, 4 of them.
Yes, there was Ishbi-Benob, Saf, and this massive warrior with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot.
That is wild.
Now, the text doesn't explicitly state that David was consciously tallying up the giant's family tree in that exact moment. But as a shepherd who defended flocks against multiple predators, David was tactically prepared to dispatch multiple threats if the Philistine vanguard rushed the field after their champion fell.
You know, that tension between preparation and flow is actually resolved beautifully by the Reddit guide. The user outlines a strict, inflexible 6-part script.
Right, what were the parts again?
It's episode intro, guest intro, sponsor slot, talking points, segments, and outro. But they emphasize that having a rigid script doesn't ruin the natural flow of a conversation.
It guides it.
Yes. It creates a secure framework for the conversation to happen naturally. Just as a structured template gives a creator the cognitive breathing room to navigate an unpredictable interview, those 5 stones gave David the tactical flexibility to face whatever happened after that first throw.
This raises an important question, really, about how structure channels the spirit. It doesn't stifle it. David's confidence was rooted in his past experiences fighting off the lion and the bear in the wilderness. He gathered the ammunition so that the living God could guide the aim.
I just love how that reframes the concept of preparation.
Mm-hmm.
But if we are looking at this structurally, we also have to admit that even the best frameworks are executed by deeply imperfect people.
Very true.
We have this tendency to view David as a glowing, flawless superhero, but the sources paint a significantly grittier, messier picture of his character.
Well, he's profoundly human. I mean, the only reason David was even at the Elah Valley was because he was running a mundane errand. He was strictly instructed to deliver 10 loaves of bread for his brothers and 10 cheeses for their commanding officer.
He was literally the camp delivery boy.
He was operating in complete obscurity. But as soon as he arrives and hears Goliath's taunts, his human flaws surface immediately.
How so?
Well, the commentaries highlight his blatant self-interest. He repeatedly walks around the camp asking the terrified soldiers, what exactly is the reward for the man who kills this Philistine?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he is highly motivated by the promise of wealth, tax exemption, and marrying the king's daughter.
He also uses a fair bit of deception when dealing with King Saul, right? When he is convincing Saul to let him fight, David vividly describes grabbing lions and bears by their hair and striking them down in hand-to-hand combat.
Yes, the hand-to-hand combat narrative.
He completely misrepresents his tactical intentions, allowing Saul to believe he is going to brawl with Goliath, when in reality, David fully intends to stay out of range and uses artillery advantage.
And we really cannot ignore the intense confrontation with his oldest brother, Eliab. When Eliab sees David asking about the royal reward, he erupts in anger. He accuses David of being presumptuous, arrogant, and having an evil heart.
Which seems pretty harsh.
He sharply asks, with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness?
On the surface, it just reads like a jealous older brother lashing out because he is embarrassed by his own fear.
Eliab's judgment in that specific moment is definitely clouded by shame. However, one of the scholars points out a brilliant piece of literary foreshadowing here.
Really? What is it?
Eliab aggressively accuses David of neglecting those few sheep to fulfill his own desires. Decades later, when David is king, he commits a catastrophic moral and leadership failure with Bathsheba.
Oh, man.
And how does the prophet confront him about it later? By using a parable about a powerful man who steals a poor man's one little ewe lamb.
That is incredibly chilling. So Eliab's irrational anger was actually a prophetic warning about David's inherent character flaws.
Exactly.
Think about how comforting that is for you as the listener trying to build something today. You don't need a flawless track record or entirely pure motives to execute a perfect strategy. You just need the right framework in the moment.
That's a great point.
So what does this all mean? The Reddit script advises creators to use specific segments to break up the monotony of a long interview, ensuring the narrative stays three-dimensional. The biblical author is doing the exact same thing with David's character. They're refusing to give us a flat, one-dimensional hero.
Because they are presenting reality. God works through deeply flawed, ambitious, messy people. David's ultimate strength wasn't moral perfection. His ultimate strength was his worldview.
His worldview.
Yeah, when King Saul and the entire Israelite army looked down into the valley, they only saw physical mass. They saw a 9'6" monster covered in impenetrable bronze.
Right.
But when David looked into the valley, he saw an uncircumcised Philistine who dared to defy the armies of the living God. He perceived the spiritual essence of the conflict, reducing Goliath's physical size to an irrelevancy.
We really need to fundamentally reorient how we apply this knowledge, because whenever this narrative is brought up in modern culture, it is instantly weaponized as a self-help motif.
Oh, absolutely.
We've all heard it. You have giants in your life, financial debt, illness, career anxiety, and you need to dig deep. Pick up your 5 smooth stones and be David.
It's just this relentless pressure to be the hero of your own narrative.
Yes, but our sources violently reject that interpretation. One of the sermons points out the absurdity of this with a story about a coffee mug.
A coffee mug?
Yeah, the pastor received a mug depicting David and Goliath. There's an arrow pointing to the giant and another arrow pointing to David with a caption that simply reads, "Not you."
That is perfect. The theology behind that mug is impeccable.
It really is.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the historical David is not a metaphor for the modern individual facing daily struggles. Theologically, David serves as a typology of Christ.
Anthology.
Right. He is the anointed champion who steps onto the battlefield to fight on behalf of a terrified, paralyzed people who are entirely incapable of saving themselves.
He steps into the valley to face humanity's true Goliath, which is the overwhelming forces of sin and death.
Exactly. We see the echo of the earliest prophecy in Genesis where God declares that the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. In the Elah Valley, David literally crushes the head of the giant with a stone.
Wow.
He is a historical signpost pointing forward to Jesus stepping into the ultimate valley. And the most crucial detail is what happens after the giant falls.
What happens?
The Israelite soldiers don't suddenly transform into fearless super warriors. They simply surge forward and chase the Philistines, running in a victory that was entirely achieved by their champion.
They borrowed the victory. They didn't earn a single ounce of it.
It is the exact same theological posture Martin Luther took at the Diet of Worms. He wasn't standing against the empire on his own bravado or willpower. He was standing on the unshakable faith that the ultimate victory had already been secured.
That's amazing.
Our spiritual strength comes from trusting the champion, not striving to become the champion.
And when you look at the final piece of our Reddit scripting guide, the outro, the user insists that a good outro must summarize the takeaways and deliver a clear call to action.
Right.
If we follow the actual theological narrative of this history, the call to action isn't go fight your giants all by yourself. The call to action is trust the champion who already fought the giant for you. It just takes the immense weight of performance completely off your shoulders.
The entire narrative arc, from the rising tension of the 40 days of taunts, to the rejection of Saul's armor, to the lethal physics of the sling, it is all meticulously designed to demonstrate that the battle belongs to the Lord. True courage is not self-confidence. It is God-confidence.
So, we set out today to understand the anatomy of overcoming impossible odds. We've mapped the strategic geography of the Elah Valley and uncovered how the kinetic energy of artillery fundamentally neutralizes the intimidation of heavy infantry.
And we discovered that meticulous structural preparation, whether that is gathering 5 specific stones from a riverbed or utilizing a rigid podcast outline, is an act of profound practical faith. It provides the necessary framework for inspiration to thrive.
We accepted the deeply comforting reality that our heroes operate with messy, complex human motives. And finally, we realized that true victory against the ultimate giants of life is something we borrow, rather than something we achieve through our own exhausted willpower.
Whenever you face a daunting, paralyzing challenge in your own life, remember that your greatest advantage will never be found by strapping on someone else's unverified armor or trying to generate false hype.
Absolutely not.
Your greatest advantage is found in faithful preparation during seasons of obscurity. Sometimes, success simply means being faithful enough to deliver the cheese, utilizing the unique tools you have actually tested, and trusting the living God with the final trajectory of the stone.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. We discussed how David picked up 5 stones because Goliath possessed 4 giant relatives in Gath who might have rushed the battlefield.
Right, the 4 relatives.
What does that imply for the structures we build and the challenges we face today? So maybe true faith isn't the belief that God will permanently wipe out every single problem in your life with one magical, perfect throw. Maybe true faith is recognizing that you only have to slay the giant standing in your valley today and simply carrying the other stones in your pocket till their day comes